Welcome to another episode of the Sabastian Show. So excited for today's guest. Danny Morel is a successful entrepreneur, real estate coach, author, speaker, and he inspires people all over the world to develop resilience, create the life they want through books, podcasts, and speaking engagements. He's committed to an oddly specific number of 3.5 billion people impacted by his work. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. Check it out. I appreciate you jumping on. I'm excited to get to know you. And after looking at a lot of your content, I think, we think very similarly just based on what I've seen of your content. So just to frame it up on my end, I'd love to hear a little bit more of your backstory. I don't want to spend too much time there because there's a lot of current things I want to get into, but I think creating healthy frames are important. And I was able to relate to some of it, but you grew up on the East Coast in New York.
Yeah, I grew up in New York City.
And you have a brother. Your mom and dad divorced when you were 13, which is, I would say, arguably probably the hardest age to deal with divorce because your frames and your worldviews get rocked radically, right? You're already starting to formate what you kind of think the world is, and to see the most stable people in your life break apart. I'd love to hear just how that framed because of what came next, and I want to relate that to what I'm doing. So what was your experience going through that as a young man?
Yeah, I don't remember giving myself the space to feel anything other than it's time for me to step up.
Were you the oldest?
I was the oldest, yeah. I was the oldest of three boys. And so my immediate reaction was, I guess it's my turn to lead, to step up, to be the man of the house.
Yeah.
I don't remember, gosh, I can remember as young as 11 years old, feeling responsible, and so, yeah, I can't say it was rough. I can't say I was sad. I can't say any of that. I just remember feeling this innate desire, because then my mom moved us to California, to just step up and figure out a way to make it happen.
Do you, in retrospect, when you look back at that, do you remember any stories about what happened? Did you take the time to go, hey, this happened because of, did you blame money? Did you blame a parent? Did you blame something for that? Or do you like, I didn't even have time to do all that. All I knew is that I needed to step up and be there for my mom and my brothers.
Yeah, it's so interesting you brought that up. I blame money.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting the way that all worked out. I blame money because my mother, the story I heard was that my mother always wanted to buy a house, and my father was constantly giving his money away to family. And only
other than core family, like your
letting other human beings borrow money. So I created a story. Number one, I don't let anybody borrow money ever.
Yeah.
And number two, I needed to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it was all because of that, and come to find out, just a couple of months ago, I actually traveled to the Dominican Republic to heal my relationship with my father. Come to find out, what actually happened was my mom was a little rough on him. My mom was put a little pressure on him. And my dad's not the kind of guy to make any more than, I don't know, 20 grand a year, something like that. He's just not wired that way. And so he was crying to me, and it broke my heart, because for the first time I realized the truth. And that's that my father really loved my mom. He really loved my mom. It's just, he didn't have the means to fulfill some of the desires that she had, and that caused the rift. And yet I made a story that my dad's this evil guy,
right?
And I hated him for all my life, and that was part of my healing journey.
How old are you now?
45.
So 32 years.
32 years of my life.
And you just saw him? Did you just see him for the first time, or have you had somewhat of a relationship? Or
4 years ago, I was hosting an event that I used to call the Relentless.
Yeah,
and
like the name.
I was on stage. This is back when I would have Kobe and all these famous people coming to my events. And I was on stage. I remember being on stage, and I remember looking out into the audience, and I heard this voice. It was Source, God, whatever you want to call it. It was clearly and audibly say, you're never going to be the man that you're intended to be, and you're never going to help them become who they're intended to be until you forgive your father. And I was like, nope, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I'm not ready for that. That's too much for me, whatever the case may be. But that's when my story began, my journey began. And now you know why when people come to my event Awaken, we go head on through a powerful meditation on healing not only the relationship with their mother and father, but all of their ancestors, so that they're connected to their entire lineage spiritually.
Wow, that's incredible. So I relate to that. My mom and dad divorced when I was a year and a half old, so I don't remember my father ever being in my life. And I was the oldest son. And I remember a very similar journey where I was 11 years old, and I came downstairs to my mom crying on the kitchen table. And I was like, hey, what's going on? I tried to help her out. It was because she trying to figure out how to pay the bills and was totally financially stressed out. I didn't have a relationship with my father. And so I attributed money as part of the problem too. I was like, at least it's got to be solved. Now, I knew my mom by that point long enough to know that there was probably a lot of dynamics to when their relationship didn't work, but money I went from being very interested in science and art to politics and business like overnight.
That's right. Yeah.
And it drove a lot of my early ambition and drive. And it kind of, I don't want to say it took me off track, because I was already very spiritually aware of why I was here and what I wanted to do, but it certainly like directed a lot of my energy towards the business world and towards politics in a way that I didn't quite anticipate. And then to your story, and I'd love to hear more, but my goal was to retire my mom and to buy her a house because she'd never owned a house. She struggled her entire life financially. And so I was like, this is what I'm going to do for my mom. And I live in Orange County now, and she always wanted to take us to Disneyland. Never got to take my brother and I to Disneyland. And now my kids go to Disneyland whenever they want. And the first time that happened, it rocked my world. Something so simple, but because it was something that was so important to her. But she passed away in 2004 from cancer. And it sounds like you have a very similar story with your mother. And it was the last thing she said to me. I walked into the room at 7:00 in the morning, and she said, thank you. I said, for what? And I thought she had been, we'd medically put her in a coma for 3 days at that point. So she hadn't been talking. And I thought my frame of reference is, oh my God, she's healing. She's getting better, because she totally turned over, totally cognitive, thanked me, and then said, we'll talk about that later. Last word she said. And it was only, it triggered something in me that started my own like realignment of success and wealth, because so much of it early on was to take care of her. And when she passed away, it rocked me, because it was like I had to realign. Well, what is my drive here? What is my reason for doing these things? It was part of my own journey. So when I read your story about this, I'm like, wow, this sounds very incredible. Can you share from your perspective what that was like for you? Because it sounds like you took on, I would explain that as energetically, you took on that mantle, or you took on that responsibility that was really your father's, and now you're owning it. And there's a husbandry role there that you're playing with your mother. And it sounds like you went through your own process with that. Would you kind of share that was like for you? You got into real estate, you're very successful, built a big company, sounds like.
Yeah, I was very much my mom's husband.
Yeah, I relate to that.
Grade, like at between the ages of 13 and 20, whatever. And my first goal coming out of high school was to buy my mom a house. And but I will tell you this, I'll fast forward to when she passed away. And she passed away in my arms. And I realize now that life is a lot deeper and a lot more profound than we are shown, yet that we get to see when we have the courage to go deep within ourselves and have true spiritual experiences and a true spiritual connection. Like, I realized that my mom had a soul contract, and she had a soul contract to help me become who I was intended to become, so that I can help who I'm intended to help, basically. And when I look at that, man, I look at like how courageous she really was, because she came here and she signed up for it. She said, I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to have a mom that passes away when I'm 13 days old, who's not going to know how to love me, so that I cannot know how to love my son, so that he can eventually, when I pass away, be brokenhearted for the first time, allow himself to truly feel something, allow
Yes.
himself to realize that he's miserable and unhappy because he's built his entire life seeking for love outside of him.
Yes.
And this very thing that I am deciding to do will give him the opportunity to go out and find what he's always wanted, which was love. And that's exactly what happened. When my mom passed away,
It
that's
freed
when
you.
my journey began. Yeah,
Yep.
my mom passing away literally was the moment that I started asking myself very difficult questions about my happiness, my
Yeah.
health, my
Yep.
relationship, myself, life, God, all of
Yeah.
it. It was like if all of a sudden something went and a door opened and it was like, oh, now we're going to start living this thing called life, you know?
For such a time as this. I would offer, and I venture you agree. She deliberately, when it was her time, she was like, "I'm out. The work is done." You know,
Yeah,
and
it
that's
was all, and it
and
was just so perfect that, you know, I'll go a little deeper. I had a moment recently, 3 or 4 months ago with my fiance. We had just finished, you know, making love to each other, and she was holding me and I started crying and crying and crying and crying and crying. And she goes, "Baby, what's wrong?" And I realized like that my whole life, the whole thing, like, you know, the desire for like riches and wealth and big cars and success and power and the big company. And, you know, even in many ways, my first marriage, like I was running through a program that was causing me to seek external love because my mom energetically never knew how to hold me from the energy of love.
yeah.
And when my fiance now held me like that, and I finally, because this is the kicker, because probably other people have wanted to hold me like that. But when I finally allowed another human being, when I finally let go of the guard, and when I finally trusted someone enough to hold me, the whole freaking puzzle fell apart. Because that's when I realized in that moment, I realized, oh my God, this is what I have been wanting my entire life. And then
Yes.
it got deeper. Then I really started crying.
Yes.
I thought, oh my God, this is why my mom was searching for her entire life. And then it made sense why she passed away in my arms.
Dude, this is beautiful. And there's a lot we can do here. So the frame I would use as you're explaining this, and many of us go through this season where we're looking to have so that we can do, so that we can be.
That's right.
And the flip is when we become whole and become integrated, we go to be, do, have. And this is so much of the work that I do is teaching people how to be present and create from their beingness. And so when I'm hearing, and you tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds like there was a story in which you believed I can only be loved, I am only valuable if I achieve these things, if I do these things, which just based on your experience with what happened with your father and your mother, it would be easy to make that judgment. I'm only valuable as a man if I do these things. So you go hard on those things, which is beautiful because it's for somebody who, as a young man, who maybe hasn't achieved success yet, when you're saying, dude, being financially free isn't all that, or being a millionaire isn't going to solve all your problems, or being financially wealthy is not going to be the answer to everything. They're kind of like, fuck you. Like, how can you say that? You're wealthy, right? There's a lesson that is learned in achieving it, right? Because then you know with total certainty, okay, dudes, that's not the answer. I have that, and I still have this hole in my heart. I still have this pain. And then the realization in that holy, I can have this wholeness in relationship with this person, and I feel loved regardless of what I have. Like the fire that comes from that truth.
The depths in that, because that's when you realize what real love is, and that's when you realize like there's a human being that loves you, whether you have it or not, whether you're fat or you have a six pack, whether you cut your hair or you don't, all the shit that you think matters. Like when you finally allow yourself to realize that somebody loves you for who you are.
Yeah.
That's a lot, man. That's deep. That's deep, because then guess what that gives you space to love them for who they are.
Yes.
The way that you love someone else is just a reflection of the way that you love yourself.
Yes. Beautiful.
You know?
Yes.
So
And
if you're
we
critical of
then
somebody
can,
else, if you're critical of somebody else, and if you're judgmental of somebody else, guess what? It's because you're critical of yourself and you're judgmental of yourself.
that's something I talk about a lot. Our awareness starts in our perception. If we can begin to see our story about a story about other is really a reflection of our inner world, right? And it gives us an opportunity, those intimate relationships, whether it be a parent or a girlfriend, a spouse, a fiance, they give us an opportunity to learn about ourselves. What is our story about a thing? What is our story about another? What is our story about love? And it shows up in those dynamics, which the deeper the relationships, the more they provoke those stories, and we can do the work, right? It's a gift. I once heard somebody say, everyone in our life is playing the role we need them to play so that we can remember.
That's right.
Which I thought was such a really beautiful way of explaining. It's like, it's a loving story, in my opinion, where everyone is a loving being. We could talk about that if that's a hard one, and they take on the role, the mask, whatever we need them to be to provoke our remembering, which is what you were alluding to in my world when you were talking about your mom had a soul contract to play a particular role, to create particular conditions for you so that you can come into the world and do your work, your calling, right? And it's all of those conditions and those stories that allow this manifestation that is now your work, right? And I'm not surprised to hear you're hitting this in your 40s. That's really when we come into our prime, right? Where like the work becomes, not always, but the work becomes integrated and we're able to really step into the season of impact. And that, I think we're seeing more and more men step into that right now. And it's really, really exciting, where it's, again, we were talking about before we got on, there's a difference between doing and being. And the most powerful demonstration is doing from being, which sounds very wordy, but it's not, right? It's not here, it's here. It's integrated work. We're leading from our heart. And it's so obvious to me when I started listening to your content. I'm like, oh, dude, this guy he is integrated. The work is being done in his heart, and it's a different message, and it will resound differently with people. They can literally feel the difference because there's an experiential knowledge there that's changing. As soon as you jump in there, go ahead.
Yeah, not only that, man, but you're spot on. I'm going to take it a step further. It's when you've done the work, you are also liberating your energy centers, your chakras, your nervous system. And so what happens is that your voice carries at a different vibration, and the words that come out of your mouth, they're connecting into people's hearts and souls, right?
Yes.
So I'll give you this example. Like back in the day when I was trying to build my business, and this is for all of you who want to talk real world marketing, right? I bought followers, I bought views, I bought famous people to come to my events. I did it all because I wanted to be famous, right? And I wanted to be well known, right? And nothing ever changed. It just felt like I was always like my social media would grow a little bit and then it would like drop because everybody would unfollow, and grow a little bit, unfollow. And then the more and more that I started working on myself, right? The more and more that I started to realize that there was a part of me, thank you, baby. There was a part of me that needed to die. And the part of me that needed to die was the part of me that needed human beings to approve of me, validate me, like me, and want me.
Yes.
Right?
And I would just say, go ahead. Good.
Yeah. And so then what happened was when that part died, you have to understand this. When your entire life you think you want something, right? And when your entire life you think that you want to, in this case, be famous, right? And all of a sudden, you get to this beautiful space in your heart where you realize it's time to let that go, and you're able to let that go.
Yes.
Get ready for the biggest panic attack, meltdown you have ever had in your life, because I literally remember being in my living room in California. I was just finishing up a walk. I was listening to Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. And he said something that just started connecting the dots for me. And I thought, wow, I no longer give a damn if I'm famous or not. I don't care. And the next thing that came out of my mouth was, oh shit. If I don't want to be famous, well then what do I want to be? Well then
What am I?
well, who am I? What am I? And I literally started hyperventilating. I had to call a friend. I thought I was going to drop dead. And so I'm not kidding. I thought I was going to drop dead right then and there. That was an ego death for me. And I had to call a friend to walk me through it, because everything I had ever wanted in life, I no longer wanted, just like that. And you know what? You want to know the crazy thing is? My message changed. My energy changed. I no longer needed you to validate me. So my content changed. And since it was no longer about me, guess what it was about? It was about you. It was about helping you to discover your power, who you really are. And it was interesting that this is all coming up, because just today I took a screenshots of my stats, and it's like, we get 20 million visitors a month on our freaking Instagram.
That's incredible, bro.
We're growing by 100,000 followers a month. I don't have to spend anything. I'm not even trying anymore. It's just because I genuinely want to help other human beings, you know?
Yes.
And with no strings attached, like me, don't like me, hate me, whatever. You hate me all you want. If it leads you back to your beautiful heart, I'm happy, man. I'm happy, you know?
Beautiful. I love this. And what you're talking about from my world is identity. I'm writing a whole book on this topic that hopefully will be out at the end of the year. To surrender, to become what we're meant to be, we must surrender what we think we are, right? And you see this in the hero's journey, whether it's Christ or other avatars, you see this process of their identity being challenged and clarified. And we have to surrender the egoic structures that we use to protect ourselves. And some would call that the dark night of the soul. When you surrender that, it's an ego death, right? Where it's who I think I am surrendering so that I can become what I have always been. And that,
Right.
The power in that is powerful, but it is deeply emotional. If it's your whole life you believed, I have to be this to be loved, or this is what I need to be, and it's suddenly you're surrendering this. It's a powerful process, and I really appreciate you sharing. That's awesome.
Thank you, man.
And you're right. It's like when you become authentic and true to who you are, what you're seeking is now seeking you, right? You go from wanting to it coming to you, and it's the same thing you'll see when somebody gets to a point where they're okay being single. That's a classic one. It's like, if I'm single, I'm single. And they release into that. I'm happy being single. And then suddenly the person of their dream shows up because they're no longer wanting it. Wanting it infers lack, right? When we no longer are desiring it in that way, we now create space and invite it into us by alignment of who we are. Energetically, we attract what we are. So that's powerful. I think we can jump in there.
Yeah. No. I don't even know what I was going to say. It's all good.
So now you go through this process, you lose your mother, says you just got reunited with your father, which is incredible. Where is your heart now? What are you focused on? And over the last 4 or 5 years, I'm just paying attention. It seems like you've definitely still very entrepreneurial, but you've kind of pivoted certainly your message and what you're focusing on. A lot of heart-centered message, a lot on relationships, a lot of healing trauma and forgiving family, the family line, which is so important. We have a commitment in my family, like our kids may have problems, but they're going to be different problems than what we had growing up, right? Which simply means we're not going to continue to pass on the shit that we inherited. We're going to, like, at least if there's problems, let's make them new problems. So what's got your attention? What's got your focus right now?
Number one is fully being present, for my fiance and our baby that's on the way.
Congratulations. That's exciting. If they're dropping in right now, anybody who's dropping in right now, babies are dropping right now, they're going to be spiritual badasses. That's the only reason you're coming in. You're coming in right now. You're coming in hot.
This little girl is going to be powerful.
No, I love it.
Yeah. But also managing, like, for example, I'm here in London. My boys are back home. So Wednesday, I fly back home, be there for 2 weeks. Then I'm going to fly back over here, be with her for 2 or 3 weeks, and then fly back over there because I have an event over there. There's just a lot going on. The US will be our home base, but while visas and all that stuff gets sorted out, it's just a little transition. So managing that, managing, the quote unquote guilt that I feel for not being there, but wanting to be here, but wanting to be there, and just allowing myself to feel all of that. And then in the public, just continuing to speak more and more authenticity into people's lives and helping them to remember that everything they've ever wanted is inside of them.
Yes.
Our last event, Awaken, we led, close to just shy of 800 people through some profound self-actualization. And I've got a vision, I used to be really attached to it, and now I just can't wait to see it. But I've got a vision of 20,000 people in open air auditoriums or fields, going through the process of self-actualization, rediscovering each other, themselves. And, I think that, look, if you look out on the news and you look what's happening, there's definitely some dark energy that is at play with what the news and society is trying to do to human beings, and how they're trying to manipulate them to the point of not loving themselves for their own sexual truth and who they are. And I feel like there's a lot of human beings that are going to be hurting. And I feel like the more and more that we connect to our hearts and we amplify at the energy of love, the more and more that we're going to be able to help beautiful people, when they're ready to receive that help. And, it's going to take awakened people to go out and spread the word. That's what it's going to do. And that's what I'm trying to do.
And there's so much here. I don't think you can legislate morality, right? You can't legislate values. Those are taught, and it's something that can be developed through conscious awakening. And to me, I think you're right. That's the work, is to educate people, not indoctrinate them, and give them real world skill sets to be able to show up in their fullest self. And a lot of this will deal with itself. I think what a lot of the healing is, we need to heal, do the inner work and heal the individual. And so much of our society right now is about using legislation to drive behavior without addressing the internal work or doing the internal work to create a whole person, right? Two broken people don't create a whole relationship. And so much of the work we're doing right now is not dealing with the actual problems. We're dealing with symptoms. So I'd love to, it seems we're going to jump in here again, but can you give a definition of self-actualization? It's a word I like a lot. I think Maslow's one that really gets credit, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization. But can you explain that from your perspective, what you think a self-actualized being is?
A realization of who we all really are. A realization that there is no separation or no difference between you and I based off of the color of our skin, based off of our
race, gender, creed,
gender, economic, what we earn, what country we were born in, that all of it is man-made. 100% is man-made. And when you finally wake up to realize that, you stop calling yourself a minority, you stop looking at yourself as different than or better than or less than or whatever, and you realize that at the center of it all is love.
Yes.
And when you realize that, you realize who Christ was.
Yes.
And you realize who you are, and you realize that it's all one and the same.
I am the way, the truth, and the light. All he was saying is, I am the example.
That's it.
I am the example. And we missed that.
He was showing us who we are. He was showing us who we, and I think that, it's interesting, but I was mad at Jesus for a very long time, because I correlated my mom's death to religion. That's a whole nother story. But when I finally had that awakening moment, it was like, oh my God, it's like, you're me, and you were just trying to help me be the best me. And you were just trying to show me what's possible for me if I sought first the kingdom of God within.
Yes. Oh.
And it got him killed. It got him killed, but he had the courage. He had the courage.
He surrendered, right? Which is an interesting conversation. He surrendered at that point because his work was done. He had nothing to prove here. I had just come back from El Salvador. I was on a medical mission there right after their civil war. And my mom got the diagnosis, and I went through a similar phase. I wasn't really mad at God, but I think I projected that more on myself, that had I been more spiritually equipped, had I already been working in the gifts of healing, that I could have healed her, which was a similar idea of this was somehow my responsibility. And it took about 18 months of work to realize, no, it was everything happened exactly as it was supposed to, and to surrender into a plan that was much bigger than I could understand at that time, which is, I teach in consciousness training, we'll teach is really transitioning from life is happening to me to life is happening for me, which is a simple frame that opens up so much of our understanding. And I love this idea. You talked about separation. What you said is a hell of a jump for most of humanity right now, right? And probably not your audience, it's probably why they follow you, but this idea of separation, the illusion of separation, that one of the elements of awakening, I thought there's three illusions that we surrender. One is the illusion of duality, the illusion of specialness or separateness, and the illusion of control. And those three all drop. Usually it's control that drops first, and then separateness or specialness, and duality is a bitch, so it usually drops last, I found.
Oh my God.
But
It is so interesting that you brought that up, because
go ahead, jump in there.
You just helped me realize something. My very first journey with ayahuasca, that's what it was all about. It was control.
Yes.
Oh, I thought I thought I was in some sort of cult. Kill us all. Well, then, and so I tried to like literally, I tried to drink so much water to throw it all up.
Yep.
She was helping me to do was to get rid of all of the energy.
And the grandmother Aya shows up and goes, "No, my son."
Yeah, I just realized that, man. It was all about control. So crazy.
Yeah, and that's usually the first one that goes. And it talk about plant medicine, which I think is such an incredible tool right now that is helping so many people get free. And I think it's a double-edged sword, but I as a tool, I think it's amazing. But generally, my experience has been when I see people who struggle with plant medicine, it usually is around control. They don't want to surrender control, and their experience is challenging, maybe negative, or a little bit on the darker side. Generally, when they don't want to surrender control. If you don't have issues with control, you just kind of bliss out, right? You just drop in and it's like, hey, what are we learning today? Right? It becomes a great teacher. So that's usually the first one to go. And then you can learn the second lesson, which is this idea of separateness, right? With the illusion of separateness that makes us think we have separate interests, that we are separate from one another. And that really, I believe, is the truth that is going to heal the world when humanity wakes up to that remembrance that we are not separate. Whether you're in the United States or the UK or India or China, we don't have separate interests. And that is, for humans to hear, having a deeply human experience is a very hard thing to comprehend. But for anybody hearing that, that's like, what the fuck are you even saying? Just presence that with yourself. Just ask yourself, how could this be true? How could this be true? How could it be true that I am not separate from another? I don't have separate interests. And then the last one is duality, which is a very hard thing to release, because duality helps us make sense of the third dimension, right? We see everything in opposites, and it actually is part of what helps us experience this world. I would say our spirit conceives, right, of the world, our mind creates the world, and our body experiences the world. And so duality is a useful tool for doing that. But when you get to a certain level of understanding, you start surrendering this idea of right and wrong, which is very scary, especially if you come from a religious background, into this idea of what is most beneficial, which is what Paul said, right, in Corinthians: all things are lawful, not all things are beneficial in the dispensation of grace, which he was simply teaching. We can surrender this idea of duality into what is the most beneficial decision to make at this point in time. So I love this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that either those illusions or separateness in general, because you're bringing that up.
Yeah, I think it's part of the journey. I think it's part of the journey, and I think it's by design.
What helped you kind of get your head around this, or your heart, I should say? What was sounds like you've had some experience with plant medicine, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please explain in your own words, but sounds like you came to this realization through a process. But for a lot of people hearing, we're not separate, how would you address that with somebody who goes, how could you possibly say that?
Yeah, listen, here's what I'll tell you. I'll put it to you this way. If you've ever seen a maze, like a labyrinth, one of those mazes that you have to get through, that's kind of like how your mind is, right? And when you're born into, fear, especially if you're for example, a young boy who was circumcised, right off the bat, you are being made to feel a certain pain in the part of you that is really the most vulnerable, based off of someone else's doing it separates you and someone else's beliefs, by the way, and it separates you from, your truest heart.
Literally, the intent of that practice, by the way, is separation.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so, I had to deal with that because I knew in my heart that it was wrong to circumcise my boys. But at the time, my ex-wife wanted to, and I wasn't, man enough to, say anything about it. But whatever, that's part of their journey.
Yep.
I got to be honest, I am not, and as a result, I think that's why I was able to, awaken in the way that I was. I think there's a correlation there. But to make a long story short, even when you're born and all of a sudden you're breathing and it's weird and it's bright and you're dropping into fear, right? You're dropping into the unknown, right? And so as a result, you drop into the energy of separation, which makes you think that you are separate from your mother, your father, which are the masculine and feminine representations of God. And then if you get even somewhat of a rough childhood, like many of us do, you start to feel like you're separate from even yourself.
Yeah.
And then you want to start to compete with other little boys and little girls for people's attention, approval. And so then you're separate from them. And then if you were, in a household where there was a lot of victimization and victim energy, and you happen to be a different color skin, then you were raised around the thought that certain people of certain color skin and ethnicity are better than you. So now you're separate because of that. And then you turn on CNN and CNN will happily show you and tell you how separate you are because of money and, all of it. It's all a program.
Yes.
Oh, 100%, 1,000,000% a program. And then, a day comes where you decide something brings you to your knees, man. Like my mom's death did. Something brings you to your knees and you go, wait a minute. I may have a big business. I may be making a lot of money, whatever the case may be, but I am not happy. As a matter of fact, I don't even know what the heck happy is. As a matter of fact, I don't even know what love is. If I'm honest with myself, I work 6-7 days a week, right? I'm 50 pounds overweight. I got a lot of money. People think I have it all figured out. I don't have anything figured out. And that's when the journey begins. And so, for me, it was plant medicine, but we now lead people through, at our events and our workshops and so forth and so on, through experiences, through meditation and breath work that gives them the same kind of experience.
Yeah. And beautifully said. I love it. I think plant medicine is a fantastic tool. And I think I've seen it change people's lives that are dealing with PTSD. I think it's a great alternative. I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on the internet, but I think it's a great alternative for a lot of what people take for anxiety and depression. The numbers are incredible. But with any group, I think you end up getting seekers, people who are looking for experience and not doing the work. But I think that's every group, whatever community you're in, there's generally seekers. But more and more people are going through that process and are able to awaken and begin to understand some very deeper truths. I love the idea that you're doing this with meditation and breath work. Can you tell us about your event, what your events are like, and how you learn to use meditation and breath work to achieve a similar result?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know how we're doing on time, so let me know if we need to wrap it up.
Yeah, we're getting close. I'll tell you what happened, man. I've always had this natural ability that, I don't know, this is my fiance's deodorant and brush, right? Let's say, right? So we'll just use the brush, for example. I see a brush, right? And this brush changes my life, right? And I know it could change everybody else's life. I don't know why. I've always been like this. I'm like, everybody, you need to go get this brush. It's just naturally how I am, right? So when I first experienced plant medicine, I thought to myself, oh my God, what would this world be like if everybody, I literally am picturing, if everybody just opened their mouths and I could fly by with a helicopter and drop some mushrooms in everybody's mouth. Game over. It's game over. We all live in heaven.
We fix a lot of problems real quick.
Right away. Right. There will be no more war. There will be no more anything. Right. And so then when I started thinking about it, I thought, man, But I know that a lot of people are afraid of that process. I understand that, right? I once was for a long time as well. And so I thought, what could I do to give people the same type of experience, the same type of spiritual awakening, realization, and experience, using my giftings and my abilities, to help them lead them back to themselves. And so I combine the power of my word and my ability to, receive messages and give that word to people, which that alone starts to like unlock the puzzle in their head.
Yes.
And then we take them deep into meditation and breath work. And, the truest purpose of Awaken is to help them to heal their relationship with their mother and father. Because if they can heal their relationship with their mother and father, they will heal their relationship with God.
Yes.
If they heal their relationship with God, they will heal their relationship with themselves. And if they heal their relationship with themselves and they heal the way that they see themselves, all the issues they have, money,
everything changes.
Health, everything changes. And so that's why I can say from the bottom of my heart is that the event Awaken is absolutely, undeniably life transformational.
Powerful. And I love that you're able to do it in a way that anybody can do. It's very approachable for anyone. And that's it, right? Like we often see our relationship with God, how we saw a relationship with our parents, right? And that's our orientation, and that already causes all sorts of problems. And our relationship, when we connect God and who we are together, when we integrate that, and that's a hell of a jump for a lot of people for a number of reasons, specifically religious reasons, everything changes. And then we realize we are the creators of our life. And that's a hard thing for people to hear, especially those who are suffering and they're going through a lot of pain in the dream of separation. Hearing that is like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I didn't create this. I don't want this. And so I would challenge anybody who's hearing these words and like, dude, I don't get it. Just ask, how could this be true? Is there any truth in this? How would I know this isn't true? If you seek truth, it will find you. If your heart is open to truth, it will find you. It wants to be found. You just have to want it. Beautiful. I got a few rapid fire questions and I'll let you go. I appreciate your time today, Danny. What book do you find yourself recommending more than any other?
I don't think there's one, man. I think it's The Power of Now.
Okay.
And you.
So you like Tolle?
I do. And Conversations with God.
Yeah. Conversations with Neil Donald Walsh. Those are both recommendations. I think I liked A New Earth more than The Power of Now, but The Power of Now does a lot of work for people. A lot of people come online through that book, so it's definitely doing its work. Conversations with God is fantastic as well. That's awesome. What's one thing you wish you could have told yourself when you were 21? So you could go back and tell yourself, what would you tell yourself at 21?
We'll do ayahuasca right now.
Let's just speed this process up.
Let's just do it now. Yeah.
Head to Peru. Let's get it done. One last question. What's something that you hold as true that is either controversial or unpopular?
I'll say it without saying it, but that when you find yourself, you'll find God. And when you find God, you'll find yourself. Yes.
I love that. Well, Danny, I would love to continue this conversation another time. I have a feeling that we could wrap for hours on this stuff.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this. It's great getting to chat with somebody who's doing the work and having an impact on so many people's lives. Where can people find you? Where is the easiest way to find you and connect with you?
Danny Morel, DANNYMOREL on Instagram or TikTok, Facebook, all things. And then we have a podcast called The Higher Self, which you can look up. And then my event is actually coming to Palm Springs. It's coming to Palm Springs. Yeah. July 27th, 28th, 29th. I'd love to invite you if you want to come.
I would love that. And I'd love to, when you're back in the area, I'd love to have you jump on and we continue this conversation. We can follow up on that one. It'd be awesome.
Okay. Sounds good, man. Sounds good.
Very cool. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on today.